All right, now again, each chat I'm going to share a new expression. So I thought this expression seemed pretty appropriate for today. So the expression is when it rains, it pours. Okay, everyone, you can say that with me at home. When it rains, it pours. So the expression basically means when one bad thing happens. So for example, when it rains, other bad things can follow. It pours. Now, the word pour means like when you're pouring a lot of water. So, sometimes when it rains, it's really, really bad. So sometimes when it rains, it rains a lot. So that's what it means by pouring. If you look at my two pictures over here, you see the little girl with the kite. She's trying to fly a kite. And there's the cloud there pouring water. So yeah, it's not just raining, it's really bad. So and if you notice over here on the right side, there's Winnie the Pooh. Maybe you know Winnie. He's having a very bad day. So when it rains, it pours. So if you look at my example here at the bottom, it says yesterday I got a flat tire, was late to class, failed my test, and then I lost my keys. When it rains, it pours. Yeah, so when one bad thing happens, like I got a flat tire, then many, many other bad things happen after. So again, sometimes we have that kind of day, right? Sometimes we have good days and bad days, and sometimes when we have bad days, it's really bad. So in this case, sometimes, yeah, when it rains, it doesn't just rain a little bit, it rains a lot. So this expression, when it rains, it pours, is what we use when we're having bad luck and lots of bad things are happening. So again, maybe this has happened to you and maybe this is happening to us now. So what I'd like to do is let's use the chat box, okay? Now this expression, when it rains, it pours, is a very popular expression in English. But what I was curious is we do have a similar expression in Spanish. So I was curious, do you have a similar expression like this in your language? So I want you to think for just a moment. Do you have an expression like this when something bad happens, many other bad things happen? Maybe you use the same expression or something similar. When it rains, it pours. In Spanish, for example, we would say when water is coming from above, it's also coming from below. So it's like raining and the water is coming in below. So in this case, in Spanish, it's not exactly the same. But I want you to think for just a moment. So how would you translate, if you have an expression like this in your language, how would you translate it into English? So what we're going to do is we're going to stop for just a moment and we're going to open the chat box. So again, everybody, if you want to go back to your phones and again, go to the More screen and click on Chat. Do you have an expression like this in your language? So take a moment and put an answer in the chat box on your phone. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. Okay, well, guys, I'm going to return to our presentation. So thank you for taking a look at that. So I'm going to return now to our presentation. Pour a lot of water on flour. Okay, okay. All right, let's try this again. Okay. All right. Okay, so everyone, we're going to return now to the presentation. So if you want to close the chat box. So thank you guys for sharing that. That was very interesting. I always enjoy learning different expressions from different languages. So once again, when it rains, it pours. So when one bad thing happens and then many bad things happen. Okay, now what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to go ahead and move into Burlington English. And what I'd like to do, let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen there. Okay. So I'd like to go ahead and move ahead in our Burlington English discussion. So hopefully you can see on the screen, we're going to be moving on in the Burlington English lesson to talk a little bit about another grammar idea. So I'm going to share a little bit of this with you here in our meeting. And then I do have some activities I would like for you to practice at home. And again, I'll have some more information about some other things we're going to do next week. Okay. Now, first off, in our next lesson, we're going to talk about these time clauses. So these time clauses listed here are before, after, and when. Okay. Now, if you look at my picture on the screen, so hopefully everybody can see this on the screen, it says in this lesson, we're going to talk about these time clauses. So using the words before, after, and when. So let's take a look at some of the examples on the screen, okay? So the first one says, when I moved, so when he moved maybe from uh, moving from one house to another or moving a box, it says, when I moved, I really hurt my back. And then notice his father over here says, oh no, did you see a doctor after it happened? So notice in the first example we see here, we're using these words when and after to help connect information. Now, one challenge that I see sometimes with students is what exactly do they mean? So for example, let's talk about the first one. So if you notice, the question here is, well, when did he hurt his back? Well, he did it when, at the moment that he did this particular action. So he hurt his back at the moment that he moved. So his back was fine before he did this action. But at the moment when he did this action, then that's what happened. He hurt his back. So his father says, well, then after that situation, did you see a doctor? So again, let's think about what happened first. Well, he moved. And then what happened next? He hurt his back. And then his father said, okay, well, after, the next thing, did you see a doctor? So the first thing we're going to notice is that these kinds of time expressions, before, after, and when, we can see them sometimes at the beginning of a sentence. So here we see it at the beginning. And when we put it at the beginning of the sentence, you will notice there's a little comma right here to separate these two ideas. But if you use the clause expression at the end of the sentence, you will notice there is no comma. So for example, did you see a doctor after it happened? So notice no comma. Now, you could move this expression and put it at the beginning of the sentence, and it would look like this. When I moved, comma. So that comma there is very important. That helps to separate the two ideas. So when we use these time words, words like before, after, and when, if we put them at the beginning of the sentence, then we use a comma to separate them. But if we put it at the end of the sentence, we do not use a comma. Okay? Okay, now everyone, again, on the screen, you may have to use your fingers to make the screen bigger or smaller. But what I'd like to do for just a moment is let's look at the conversation on the left side of the screen. So you might want to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see it better on your screen. Okay, so this is a conversation. So we have two people talking to each other. Okay. So I'm going to read the conversation very quickly, and then we're going to do this first activity, okay? So let me read it for you. So Ava says, how's your new apartment? Noah says, not great. When it rains, the living room window leaks. The wall under the window gets very wet. Oh no, how awful. That's not all. I bought a new sofa after I moved in. I put it close to the window, so it's wet too. Did you talk to your landlord? Well, I called him this morning before I went to work. He didn't answer, so I left a message. Now, if you notice in the conversation, we have identified those time expressions. So everyone, say these with me. You can practice these just there at your phone. When it rains. Okay, everyone say that. When it rains. Okay. After I moved in. Okay. And then finally, before I went to work. Now, as we look at each example, so now we're going to look over at the right side of the screen. So again, I'm going to zoom in to help you a little bit to see it. So what we're going to think about is, how can we answer these particular questions? Let's take a look at them. So for example, number one, when does the living room window leak? Now your first question might be, what does leak mean? Well, leak is when water is coming in. So again, often we have leaks in our kitchen when water comes in from the sink and the sink is turned off. So in this case, the window is letting water come in, okay? Now notice the first question says, when does the living room window leak? Well, let's look over at the conversation. Well, the living room window leaks, but only in a certain situation. Well, what is that situation? When does the water come in? Okay, well, if you look over in the conversation, there's the answer. So the living room window leaks when it rains. Now think about that for just a moment. So it rains, right? And then it leaks. So in this case, the living room window does not leak when it's not raining. So in this case, it leaks when the rain happens. So at the moment of the rain, the living room window will leak. Okay? All right, let's look at question number two. When did Noah buy a new sofa? Okay, now let's take a look at the conversation again. So he bought a new sofa. Now, did he buy the new sofa before he moved into the apartment? Well, let's see. In the conversation, it was raining and water was coming into the window. Notice Ava says, oh, that's terrible. How awful. And then he says, that's not all. I bought a new sofa. Uh-oh, new sofa after he moved in. So in this case, when I ask question number two, when did he buy a sofa? It says after he moved in. So he rented the apartment and then he bought the sofa. Okay. And then finally, the last question says, when did he call his landlord? Well, again, if I look at the conversation, here's Ava. She said, did you talk to the landlord? And Noah said, well, I called him this morning before I went to work. Okay, so the question is, what happened first? Did he go to work first or did he call his landlord? Well, let's see. He called his landlord before. So in other words, he called the landlord first and then after he went to work. So before he went to work, he called his landlord. So again, I want you to notice in our examples here how we are using those time expressions. So when it rains, so often we use it at the beginning of the sentence. Now, could I change the sentence for a moment? Could I say the living room window leaks when it rains? Well, for a moment, I'm going to bring up the whiteboard. Okay, so first thing I want to do is let's clear our board there. Okay. All right, so on the whiteboard, I'm going to put that sentence, okay? Okay, so there it is, when it rains. Well, if I can get it to work there, let's try this again. There we go. So again, one of the things we're learning here in this lesson this morning is that this expression, when it rains, we can move the expression to the end of the sentence. So for example, we could also say, the living room window leaks when it rains. Now look at those two examples. Okay, see those two examples on the screen? So once again, notice there's the comma. If I put the expression when at the beginning of the sentence, see, there it is, then I'm going to use a comma to separate the two parts of the sentence. But if I use the expression at the end of the sentence, so for example, the living room window leaks when it rains, then I don't need to use the comma, okay? So part of the idea here in English is that I can move this information around. Let's take one more example. So again, look at the screen there. So we're going to do one more example. So let's use the sofa example. So he said, I bought a new sofa after I moved in. Okay, so I'm going to kind of move that up a little bit so we can see it. Okay. So it says, I bought a new sofa after I moved in. Now, once again, let me just move that up there. Let's see what's going to let me. There we go. Okay, maybe you can see it better now. Okay, so for example, could I put after I moved in at the beginning of the sentence? Well, let's try it. Okay, so notice in this case, I may have to make it a little smaller there. Okay, there we go. That might be a little easier to see now. Okay, so again, in my second example there, I bought a new sofa after I moved in. So again, English is very flexible. I can move that expression to the beginning of the sentence. After I moved in, comma, I bought a new sofa. So you can move this information around. So I think what is often a challenge for students is oftentimes they understand the information when it's at the beginning of the sentence. But remember, many times English speakers will put the information at the end of the sentence. Now, one more thing I want to show you is how we would pronounce these two different sentences. So I'm going to use my pencil here. Now, guys, I want you to try to practice this right there at home, okay? So guys, repeat after me. I bought a new sofa after I moved in. Okay, now you try it. Ready? I bought a new sofa after I moved in. Okay, so if you notice where the word after is, I'm going to start my sentence up and then I'll go down at the end of the sentence. Okay, now look at my second example. Because of the comma, so the comma is going to change how we pronounce the sentence. And because that time expression is at the beginning of the sentence, notice how I'm going to say it a little differently. Okay, now everyone will just listen. After I moved in, I bought a new sofa. So notice I had a little pause. So I'm going to use this little symbol here. Now, this is not a hashtag on Instagram, okay? This represents a pause in our example here. But if you notice my voice kind of goes up and down. So oftentimes, if I'm using one of these time expressions at the beginning of the sentence, you'll hear English speakers use this kind of movement with their voice. Okay, now everybody, you try this at home. Okay, so say it after me. After I moved in, I bought a new sofa. So notice my voice is going to go down. Okay. Okay, so the idea here is in comparing these two sentences, and anytime we see those time expressions at the beginning of the sentence, we're going to hear a slightly different pronunciation. So one more time, listen to the two sentences. Just listen to them. I bought a new sofa after I moved in. After I moved in, I bought a new sofa. So can you hear the difference? Well, again, the big difference really is here. These two little things that we're looking at here in our online class this morning. So this little movement of my voice, some of you might remember, I've talked about this before in other classes, but some of you might remember this is what's called a hesitation. Everyone say that with me, hesitation. Okay, so the hesitation is when you hear a person's voice kind of go like that kind of up and down sound. And a hesitation, when we hear that hesitation, that usually means more information is coming. Okay, so that hesitation is telling you that more information is coming. So when I move the information to the beginning of the sentence, we know that more information is going to come. Okay. And then finally, when we see the comma, so there's that comma there. So again, we'll draw a little line there. So remember, when we see the comma is going to be, again, a pause in our speaking. So again, when we pause, we take a short little kind of stop, a short little breath before we continue. Now, I know English speakers don't always speak that clearly or slowly, but we're trying to learn the idea here this morning, okay? Now, once again, let's think about, okay, I want to move this over here just a moment, okay? So if we go back to the beginning, so at the top of the screen, where it says when it rains. Now, again, think about that pronunciation. How are we going to say that? So again, we're going to use that hesitation, right? So everyone, let's try it. Let's say it together. When it rains, the living room window leaks. Okay, now try the second example. The living room window leaks when it rains. So again, notice I have a pause in the first example, but in the second example, no pause, no break. So again, that's what I want you to think about when you're practicing with these expressions at home, okay? All right, so I'm going to return just for a moment to our presentation. Okay. Okay, so once again, in talking about our lesson, the idea is I would like for you to practice with this particular activity at home. So again, you're going to be doing some activities on Burlington English to help you practice with these expressions. So for example, let's take a look at this, this example here on the screen. All right, so everybody hopefully can see that on their phones. All right, now let's take a look at these 4 sentences. Now, the first thing we're going to do is to try to highlight the time clauses. So it says first we're going to select the text, and then we're going to use the highlighter. So this is the highlighter here, that yellow that we see. And then this is the eraser to erase anything. Now, as we said before, we're going to try to say the sentences with the time clause in a different place. So for example, let's look at number 1, okay? And again, I'll zoom in just a little bit, maybe if we can't see it, okay? All right, so here's number 1. So number 1 says, she often forgets to lock her door when she's in a rush. Okay, now guys, right now, think to yourself, where does the time clause begin? Where do we see the time word in the sentence? Let's see, no, it's not door. Aha, there it is, when. Okay, now the question is, where do I stop? So it says we're going to select the text. Okay, so for example, if I select when is the beginning of that time clause. But I want to continue until I'm finished. So for example, I'm going to go to the end of the sentence. Now let's click on the highlighter and we'll highlight that first answer. Okay, now let's see if we're correct. So I'm going to click on the first answer and we are correct. Okay, now the question though is, how are we going to say this sentence? Well, for example, what if we moved this part of the sentence to the beginning of the sentence? Well, let's practice it. So for example, let's move this part to the beginning of the sentence. Let's say it, okay? So ready? Let's say it together. When she's in a rush, there's that hesitation, okay? Pause. She often forgets to lock her front door. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, ready? When she's in a rush, pause, she often forgets to lock her front door. So again, if we're moving the clause to the beginning of the sentence, right, then we move it to the beginning and we say it a little bit differently. So again, let's think about in our whiteboard how we did it before. So again, if we move the clause to the beginning of the sentence, so let's clear the screen. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to type it up here on the screen. Sorry, guys, it's kind of sensitive. There we go. Okay. Okay, so once again, there's the original sentence, and we'll see if we can make that a little bigger. Okay. Sorry, guys, I'm learning how to use the tools for the first time here, so there we go. Okay. All right, so maybe you can see that a little better. So she's often, okay, she often forgets. So once again, remember, if we move it to the beginning of the sentence, so what do we need here? When she's in a rush, right? What do we need? That's right, we need a comma. She often forgets to lock her front door. So there it is. When we use these time expressions, we can move them in different places. We can move them in different places in a sentence. But remember, when we move them, we have to separate that information with this comma. And again, that comma helps us with pronunciation too. Okay? All right. Well, guys, we're getting close to the end of our lesson today. So as you know, it's a little hard to kind of ask questions in this format. But I hope that everyone is able to kind of follow along as we're participating here. But again, we'll give everybody a chance to ask questions here in just a moment. So I want to go back for just a moment, though, to Burlington English. Okay? Now, when you guys are going to be practicing on your phones or on your accounts, so I'm going to go back for just a moment to the courses. So again, on your phones, if you're using Burlington English on the courses, so hopefully everyone has been able to use Burlington English on your computer or on your phone. But again, if you're using it on your phone, so you're going into student lessons, so again, in just a moment, I'm going to show you what activities I would like for you to try for next time. But I am going to show you that for activity 4, the grammar activity, so again, you will have different activities, but you will see some of the same information we talked about here this morning. So again, you will see the same introduction in the lesson. Again, you will see some reading activities that you can do. Now, I'm going to share a video with you after we're finished here in our class to help you kind of learn how to use Burlington English better on your phone. So if you're using it on your phone, there are some particular challenges, some particular problems. One problem is sometimes it's hard to see the screen in the Burlington English app. So I've produced a little video to show you how you can move things using your fingers. But the problem is you cannot resize the screen on the app. So when I share this video with you, please watch the video before you do the grammar activities and the watch and speak activity. Because the watch and speak activity, I would like for you to do activity 4 and activity 5. And again, activity 5 is a speaking activity. So let me see if it'll appear here on the screen. Oh, it's a little slow. Let me see if I can get it again. Okay, there it is. So again, obviously using Burlington English on the computer is probably easier. So if you have a computer, if you can use it on the computer. But if you're using it on the phone, in the video, I explain some of the difficulties if you have to try to resize the screen. But there are some really great activities, speaking activities and things that you can do. So I'm going to share with you a couple of videos. One video is specifically talking about this activity. But for example, I would like to talk about this one very quickly. This is one of the speaking activities you can practice at home. And again, in the activity, you can listen to the conversation. So in this case, you're listening to the conversation. And then it says you can record yourself as the tenant. Now remember, last week we learned the tenant is the person who's renting the apartment. Now, if you've never done this activity before, on the phone, it's a little difficult. It's a little small to see on the screen. But this particular activity you'll have to do on the app if you're using it on the phone. So again, in my video, I explain the difficulty of doing this activity. But I do want to show you that you can, you practice with a certain character. So for example, this is the tenant. If you want to practice in continuous mode, that means you are actually speaking in the conversation. If you don't want to speak in continuous mode, then it kind of pauses and waits for you to go to the next line, okay? And then if you really want a challenge, you can hide the text from the landlord, and then you can wait until it's your turn to speak. So the idea is you can practice some speaking on the app as well. Okay, so again, I'm prepared some videos, especially the one video to kind of help explain the best way to use Burlington English on your phone. So I do hope that you have had a chance to practice on your phone. Okay, well, guys, we're getting close to the end of our time here, so I want to go ahead and first off, thank everybody for participating here this morning. But let's go ahead and talk about what's next. Okay, so again, I'm going to send you a couple of things in your email when we're finished here this morning. So the first thing I'd like for you to do is to watch the video about how to use your phones with Burlington English with these activities. So for next time, I want you to try the low intermediate lesson 8 housing activity. I want you to try the grammar activities, and I'd like for you to try the watch and speak activities. Okay? Now, I would like for you to try to finish these activities before our next chat, which is next Tuesday on April 7th. Now, I also know that it's this time that we have together here on Tuesdays. It's kind of a chance for us to talk a little bit and for me to present. But I know some of you would like more opportunities to talk. So what I'm going to do next week. So next week I'm going to be scheduling some individual times when you can practice a speaking activity with me. Okay. So immediately after this meeting, I'm going to send you a link with a list of times. Now, what you can do is you can tell me which times are you available. So if you would like to practice some speaking activities with me, we're going to have about a 20-minute opportunity for each student to practice a speaking activity. So I'm going to send you this information, and I would like for everybody, if you can, please respond by Wednesday. So that's tomorrow. So again, after this meeting, if you could immediately fill out that information and let me know, because then I can schedule these meetings with you. And I know that we would like a chance to do a little more speaking and practicing. And we're going to try lots of different things here in our online situation. Okay? All right. Well, guys, again, our next chat will be Tuesday, April 7th. Now, I say 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. It's probably not going to be the full hour. That gives us a chance to kind of just, ask any questions or talk about anything. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing.